Welcome back and thank you for joining us. We are having our first conversation for the morning, and we want to apologize for the technical difficulties we were experiencing. We are currently online with Dr. Dorian Barrow, and he is the Dean and Faculty of the Dean of Faculty of Education over at Galen University. He's joining us via Zoom, and we are also hearing him via phone, so that may be one of the reasons why you would hear a bit of feedback this morning. But good morning, Dr. Dorian, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Sabrina. Thank you very much for having me. Isani, it is always a pleasure for Galen to be on Channel 5. Galen University, as you know, is a small private university in Belize. We don't only offer programs in arts and science and technology and in business and in education, but we're also required to do research. We're required to provide service to the community. And one of the things that our research director, Dr. Silberto Pinados, have done is to organize a Galen research series where every 2 weeks in the regular semester, we have a presentation by one of our academics in the university. This week is my turn to present on a piece of research that I've been doing for quite a number of years now, actually, where I'm monitoring the whole issue of the East Indians of Belize. East Indians of Belize. It's the East Indians, as you know, of Belize is a small ethnic group, right? It only makes up overall about 3% of the population, total population. But what you have is you have concentrations of East Indians in 3 parts of the country. Now, East Indians are in every nook and cranny of Belize, but the concentrations are in 3 parts of Belize, of the country.
Right.
There's a concentration in the south, right? There is a concentration in Belize City, and you remember the Wolf Harbors Road used to be East Indian territory.
I was waiting for you to go there.
There's a concentration in the north, particularly in villages like San Antonio. As a matter of fact, we have a village in the north that is called Calcutta, name of the East Indians. So you have these 3 clusters of East Indians that are in Belize, and although nationally they only form 3% of the population, when you look at their relative significance locally, like in the south, they constitute 11.7% of the population. In Belize, in the Belize district, in Belize City, they would only constitute 3.6%, but in the north, it's almost 7%. So in the south and the north of the country, there is sufficient numbers for them to be considered a very, very serious ethnic group, a very, very serious ethnic group. And so this study is about looking at the extent to which these 3 groups have retained their Indianness. Their Indianness. How, for example, do they relate to East Indians in the country, right? You have East Indians in the south, East Indians in the center of the country, East Indians in the north. Do they communicate? And if so, what is the nature of that communication? Do they participate in Indian festivals that they used to do before they came to this country? The East Indians of Belize came to Belize. The first load of them, shipload of them came to Belize from Jamaica in 1859. 1859, about 1,000 of them, and they were sent to these 3 different locations. And so the study is about how they have been creolized, they have been integrated into the larger ethnic group, right? And what are they doing about it, right? What are they doing about it? There has been two basic forces pulling them in two different directions. There is this force for them to be absorbed in the larger population, in the larger ethnic group population. All right? And there is this other force pulling them, a force of emancipation, where they are recognizing that this creolization is a negative thing for them, and where they are resisting it. They're coming up with strategies of resistance. They're coming up with strategies of education. And so this study looks at how these three groups are coping with these two major processes of creolization and emancipation, and what it is doing to them. And two of the main things that it's doing to them, one of them has to do with disconnectedness. It is disconnecting a lot of them from their East Indian cultural and ethnic moorings. They've lost their language, they've lost their religion, and some of them even have difficulty finding partners. You know, it's when I surveyed the people in Belize City, for example, it was difficult to find an East Indian man that was married to an East Indian woman, right? That was the level of creolization that had happened in Belize City. It is not as extensive in the south and in the north. And that is what this presentation is going to be about. It's a quantitative and a qualitative study. It's a mixed method study. So there are some themes that develop qualitatively, and then we try to validate those themes from a quantitative survey. The presentation is going to be at Galen this morning at 10:30, from 10:30 to 11:30. And for those of you who can make it to Galen, to a Central Farm campus, then you can join us live, because it's going to be streamed on the Galen Facebook page.
Right.
Okay, Dr. Barrow, I have a couple of questions for you here, right?
Yes,
From
sir.
the research that you've done, let's zero in on the significance of the East Indian population in Belize City, more specifically on Farbers Road. You alluded to that earlier. It's always been, for me, an area of interest, because growing up in Belize City, we know that, yes, that stretch of road is primarily inhabited by persons of East Indian descent. But how did that come to be from your research?
Essentially, what happened when the East Indians were the portion, the original portion that came to the country that was allocated to the Belize district, they worked essentially as domestics, or they worked in the waterfront area, right? And essentially they were not very integrated into the Creole elite society. So Farbers Road at that time was the outskirts of Belize City, right? Outskirts of what was then Belize town, right? So basically,
essentially they were relegated. They were relegated to that location.
No. One of the things was that they ended up acquiring these lands, right? A lot of the lands in Farbers Road, a lot of the lands along the George Price Highway, all the way to mile 8, 9, 10, 12 there, were basically East Indian lands. It has subsequently been sold to other developers at the country. So that has been one of the reasons where they were concentrated, where they ended up concentrating, sort of out of town, on the periphery of town. If you notice that it's the same pattern in the south, right? The concentration of the East Indians in the south is not in Punta Gorda town.
You're talking Cattle Landing, Forest Home.
But it's in communities outside on the periphery of the town, like at Cattle Landing, at Forest Home, at Mafrodai, and these kinds of places. And in Coruscant, it's the same thing. The concentration is not in Coruscant town. right? It's in places like Calcutta, it's in places like San Antonio, that kind of.
So is this the result of perhaps social acceptance, so to speak, if we did not fully integrate them or recognize them as part of our Belizean society at that point in time?
Yes, it is. It is a part of the whole. It's a part of what happens when you have different ethnic groups come together, right? And there is the fight, the initial fight for the ethnic group to retain its identity, especially in the case of the East Indians, because they came here as indentured workers.
Yeah.
They were basically free people. Unlike, let's say, the African slaves who had to be integrated in the way how the master wanted them to be integrated. So they fought, they did their best to try and do things that would ensure that they are able to maintain their basic cultural practices, how they dress, the food that they eat, their partners, being able to select a partner, and this kind of stratification was a result of them trying to do that, and in a way to avoid the powerful political, economic, and intercultural force of creolization, right? Creolization. There is always that tendency where the major group want to assimilate them.
Fair enough. Dr. Barrow, let's look at it from perhaps a slightly broader perspective. When you look at three distinct ethnicities in Belize, you're looking at, for instance, the Creoles, you're looking at the Garifuna, and you're looking at the East Indians, right? So the East Indians were...
Don't forget the Mayas.
Yes,
right?
yes, I know, but I'm limiting it to only three to ask you a particular question here. So...
Well, the reason why I mentioned the Mayas is that in the South, right, and one of the implications of this study, and I didn't know this, is that in the South there is tension between the East Indian community and the Mayan community.
Yes.
But ask your question.
Okay, so here we go. So you have three ethnicities: Creole, Garifuna, East Indian. So the East Indians came as a result of indentureship. The Creoles are the descendants of the slaves who were brought to Belize, and the Garifuna were essentially free when they arrived on the shores of Belize in 1830s or what have you, right? So the point that I'm making here is that if you look at the element of cultural preservation, for instance, I would want to think that the East Indians would have, practiced Hinduism, correct? But we don't really see that much if we're looking at certain parts of the country, including Corozal and Toledo. It's the same way where we look at the Creole culture, where they're trying now to be able to preserve what's left of their cultural identity. Would you agree to such an observation?
Yes, I think it's a very significant observation, right? And it's one of the points that I make in the presentation. There are only you see the East Indians that came to Belize. They were religion from the religion perspective. They were Hindus and Muslims, right? And one of the things that I found really alarming was that of the population that we looked at, and we looked at 300 or so East Indians from these three regions, only 1%, only 3 out of those 300 East Indians were Hindus. Only 3.
Wow.
Right? And there were about 16 or 6% that were Muslims. All the rest, they have become predominantly Christian, Roman Catholic, Anglican, Methodist. They have given up, or it has been, according to their relation of the story, their religion have been taken away from them.
Yeah.
Right? And now we have a group, educated, people like Dr. Albert Williams, people like Mr. Flores, who are trying, right, to to foster this whole spirit of emancipation and really dealing and front on with some of these oppressive forces, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Barrow, having spent so many years gathering the findings of your research and now being able to present this today at the university, what do you hope to be one of the main takeaways from this presentation as it relates to East Indians preserving their identities in Belize?
Well, the major thing for me is the invisibility of the East Indians, right? Even though we have a plural society or a pluralistic society in Belize, right, and the East Indians constitute 3% of the national population, right? The East Indians have made very significant contributions to the development of Belize. For example, the very first Chief Justice, right, George Singh, was an East Indian, right?
Yeah.
We have in the transportation industry, you have the James Boat Line.
James Williams,
right?
yeah.
Is an East Indian entrepreneur that. So they have made contributions in all sectors, including agriculture. At one point in the history of this country, Big Falls was the rice-producing
capital
center of the country.
Yeah.
And it was basically coming from East Indian farmers. East Indian farmers. So my takeaway, or what I would want people to walk away from this presentation from, is asking themselves, well, what can we do to ensure that the East Indians of Belize do not further lose their cultural and ethnic identity? Because their contributions in the past and currently is significant and it needs to be celebrated, right? And because of the possibilities of their link to places like India, right, which is their homeland. India is, a lot of people treat India as a second-rate country. India is one of the biggest economies in the world, right?
It's one of the most populous countries in the world as well.
And the technology development, especially in things like AI, and those kinds of technologies are coming out of India. So connections, ethnic connections with that can further enhance the development of Belize.
So my final...
yes.
My final question to you, Dr. Barrow, is that, so again, we're looking at, in essence, cultural preservation, right? So you have to have a community of people who band together, who are of like minds in terms of being able to hold fast to their traditions, their customs and beliefs and what have you. So we have a National Creole Council that looks after these particular matters with respect to that ethnicity. We have a National Garifuna Council that looks after our own concerns where that is where that comes to play. But is there in your research perhaps an active group that represents the interests of the East Indian community across the country?
Well, that is one of the problems. We do have East Indian councils, right? There are 3 of them.
Okay.
Right? There is an East Indian Council that's in the south. There is one in Belize, in the Belize district, primarily in Belize City, an East Indian Council. And there is an East Indian Council in the north, right?
Yeah.
They're being supported in a very marginal way by niche, right? But to a large extent, on their own in terms of their efforts at cultural preservation.
Right.
One of their biggest problems is with inter-council communication. Inter-council communication. The council in the north is not in any structural way connected to the one in the center, in the east, and the one in the south, right?
Yeah.
So there is not a national East Indian Council, which I think is absolutely necessary if they're going to be making the kind of progress that they want to make on this front. In the same way that we have a national Garifuna Council, there needs to be a national East Indian Council, right, that is supported by the state and that is supported by other communities, especially those the new, what they call the new East Indians, you know, the Indian stores, the new immigrants, right?
Yeah.
They are East Indians too, as part of the East Indian the wider East Indian diaspora, but the relationship that they have with the local East Indians is very, very minimal.
Minimal. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Very, 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 very minimal.
Well,
They hardly support them. So that is my hope for there to be a national East Indian organization that is recognized by all the parties to advance a clear agenda of cultural preservation of the East Indian community in Belize.
Dr. Barra, we want to say thank you so much for joining us and sharing some of the findings of your research. We definitely appreciated the information and the conversation with you this morning. We are a bit short for time, so we will be closing the conversation as of now. Again, we want to say thank you so much for joining us, and we want to also remind our viewers that the presentation will be at the Galen University of this morning, correct?
This morning at 10:30 at the Central Farm campus, or they can join us on our Facebook Galen page, because it's going to be streamed on live online.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Barrow. Again, do have a good one, and good luck on your presentation as well.
Well, thank you very, very, very much for having me, and have a good day, both of you.
All righty. All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, it's all about the Radisson Pop-Up Fair. Find out after we come back.